Click it twice. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna give it just like one more minute, because I'm sure we'll have more folks jumping in, but really appreciate you all spending a bit of your evening with us here. Yes, and please do feel free in the chat to let us know who you are, what you're teaching, and where you're based. Um, I believe those settings are updated now, so folks should be able to do that now. Okay. Well, we will go ahead and get started so that we can keep to good time, but please do continue that conversation in the chat, and we'll talk about where and how you can share questions for our panelists as we get this moving. But um, hi, Hannah. And thank you all for attending this panel on connecting students to AI accountability news stories. We are very excited to celebrate the work of Pulitzer Center's AI Teacher Advisory Council with you. I'm Donnelly Jamna, DJ, a senior program manager on the Pulitzer Center's K-12 education team, and I'm joined today by 4 incredible members of our AI Advisory Council. And they'll introduce themselves in just a minute. On our agenda for today, we're going to start with this brief welcome and introductions. We'll learn about our amazing panelists and how they work together to engage in a study of Pulitzer Center reporting on AI accountability, and how those news stories that they studied can support the needs of teachers and students who are hoping to better understand AI technologies. Before we close, the panelists will have an opportunity to answer questions from the audience, and the tools that they are presenting today will be available next week on the Pulitzer Center website. Please utilize our Q&A. Your voice is important to us. We want to help you stay connected to the conversation. And so as panelists are sharing, you're welcome to add questions there. We'll return to them at the end. If you have a question that is meant for a specific panelist, please include their name so that we can direct it to them. And we'll try to get to as many as we can before the end of our time. And so to quickly introduce the Pulitzer Center, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I see Marta from Italy. I don't know if you're new to Pulitzer, but thank you for being here. And Carla from Minnesota and Isabella from Brazil. Hopefully you've heard of the Pulitzer Center. If not, you should know that our mission is to champion the power of stories to make complex issues relevant and inspire action. We believe that journalism can be a key element for mobilizing society, and that the people and communities who actively engage with systemic challenges will find solutions together. This slide captures our 5 main journalistic focus areas at this time. And our AI Teacher Advisory Council is an audience engagement program for our information and artificial intelligence focus area. So as I said, we have 4 council members here with us today, but this was a larger group, and we wanted to take a moment to appreciate the council members here. Some are here in the chat, and you'll have information on all of them when the resources are published next week. These council members engaged in a study of classroom needs through teacher survey data. They learned from journalists in our Pulitzer Center AI Accountability Network And they utilize their own expertise and classroom experiences to create the tools they'll be sharing that will help equip you with the basic understanding you need to engage in conversation and exploration of the emerging technologies around us. These teachers have implemented the tool with their own students, and they'll be bringing that learning and support from their classrooms here as well. So here's the full list of our council members, names and states represented. They teach all various grade levels and in all parts of the country, which is very cool to see. And I'll let our 4 members that are here with us today introduce themselves before we get started. Anyone, you start. Sorry.
I can start. Hello, I'm Jodi Hoard. I am a 6th and 7th grade teacher. I teach ELA and social studies in Chicago. And I came to this because I didn't know much about AI, and it's been a great experience, and it's great to be here with all of you.
Hey everyone, my name is Jane Lawrence and I'm a high school art teacher. And I came to this program for the same reason. I really wanted to learn more about AI and how to teach about AI to my design thinkers.
Hi, everyone. I'm down at the bottom. I'm Kerri-Jean Furtado. I am middle school civics and social studies. And I came to the AI Teacher Advisory Council because I had had some exposure looking at some of the Pulitzer reporting, especially an article in particular on AI. And I really wanted to deepen my understanding of that and also develop something that can help teachers who may be curious about AI and maybe thinking, oh, is it just ChatGPT or is there more that I need to know? And so building out that resource really was helpful in developing those concepts.
Hi, I'm Linda Matsumoto. I've been with the Evanston-Skokie School District as an educator for the past 11 years, formerly with the an elementary school. This year I'm with the middle school. And I'm a former Chicago Tribune reporter. So this AI Teacher Advisory Council really spoke to me when I saw the application. When I was a reporter, we didn't have AI, so it really it's so impactful, and I just wanted to make sure that we could share some of the resources that we developed with other teachers. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And yes, we're going to jump right into the resource presentations. So we'll present our resource for educators, the resource that will help you kind of frame the conversation and know where you're headed in your classroom, and then a resource that you can utilize actively with your students as like a classroom activity, a lesson. Before we go into each panelist sharing about their takeaways, their experience, their advice for you, and our moderated conversation. So I'm going to pass it over to Kerri and Linda.
Thank you, DJ. So you might be wondering just what is this teacher resource? And to be honest, that's a question we were wondering too. What is it we're trying to build here? And the easiest way to explain it is, first of all, it's an infographic. We took a lot of opportunity to collaborate as a team. We had middle school teachers, high school teachers, and we looked at some data that had been collected because we wanted to know what is it that teachers need to know if AI is here. How is it impacting us? And so there was a team of teachers that created this tool. And our goal is not to give you every single aspect of AI because this would not be a toolkit. This would be an encyclopedia or novel. But instead, it really is a primer. It's an overview of if you're going to teach your students about AI, if you're going to teach them how to be accountable online, here are some strategies that you can use. Here is some background knowledge that you'll want to have. As you look through the toolkit, you'll notice we don't just talk about generative AI. There's many different types of AI, so that's going to be something that gets included. And we also look at how can you really use AI in the classroom? How can you address it as a tool when you're looking at reporting, when you're looking at what's being said, what's not being said, and really looking at what's happening in the world around you. Linda, do you want to take the next part?
Sure. Before I delve into it, I do want to credit as you did, the collaborative effort of each of the other members of the AI Accountability Council. That included Tatiana Acuna, Nicole Morris, Susan Zoe, Cheyenne Brooks. I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing your name. Tatiana Acuna was particularly helpful in that she actually did the initial layout and design on Canva for us. And then we all contributed to the different components of this infographic. We sort of brought our expertise to whatever section we chose. And my background also included spending 6 months last year with the National Education Association AI Task Force in helping to develop their policy for the responsible, ethical, and equitable applications of AI in education. Getting back to this, our resource, the infographic, centering the teacher resource with the Pulitzer reporting was a focus because it's an educator reference to analyze underrepresented news stories, some of which have included predictive and surveillance technologies, and it provides enhancement opportunities for students to engage with journalism. So.
I'm back. It's me again. So how does this resource meet the needs of teachers? I kind of alluded to this a little earlier. While it will not answer every question that you're going to have, you will come away with this toolkit knowing some of the group uses of AI, whether we're using AI in a generative sense, a predictive sense, or if it is being or reactive sense, you'll have an understanding of how old is AI. A lot of people might think, oh, AI, it just developed in the 2000s. And if you read through the primer, you're going to find that that answer is a little far off from what you might be thinking. So it's helpful for a teacher to have that background knowledge because in your classroom, you're going to have those students who will ask that question. And while they could use their devices to Google the information, it's also helpful for you to have that knowledge to be able to determine, is this accurate information? Is it not accurate information? How can we attend to this? You'll also have an opportunity to look at what are the ways that beyond just creating something, what are you creating? What is it? What is AI doing? What is AI not doing? Are there questions that maybe you want to consider? And I'll talk more about that with the resource and how I used it in my classroom. But this really led to some fantastic conversations about what is it that we really need to know about AI? And I think you're going to get a sneak peek in just a moment of what this resource is going to look like. Hopefully you're going to appreciate the work that we put into this. We went through digital citizenship, safe access. We looked at what students and adults really need to know about online safety. And so there's so many different opportunities to learn from this toolkit that I'm now seeing up on screen. And DJ, did you want to take over? Do you want me to keep narrating?
Well, y'all have done a great job of sharing so far, but yes, I just wanted to allow folks to get the full visual here. I'm trying to zoom in so you could kind of see more closely. And like we said, these will be published very soon for teachers to utilize in their classrooms. But here are the different categories, and each is given a whole page, like a dedicated page here. So for digital citizenship and footprint, you can think a little bit about, what is data? What does it mean for us to utilize these tools? Where do they get their data from? What does it mean to help my students navigate the way that they utilize technology and think about the footprint that they're leaving? And one of the stories linked here, Peering into the Black Box by Arijit Sen, is a story about university students whose digital footprints were utilized as a sort of surveillance tool at their schools, right? They were pulling in student social media information. The tool said to try to figure out if there were any like mental health risks, if any students were in trouble, but it was also used to monitor protests. And so that was like one of those stories that you could use to kind of have this conversation with your kids about how everything that they post online will stay there. There is this breakdown on the different types of AI that the teachers did a really great job with, and thinking again about what is the difference between, you know, the chess playing computer game that you might utilize and then a tool like Midjourney. What does that look like? How do they work differently? And feel more comfortable having those conversations with students. The chronology, the history and evolution of AI that was discussed. So seeing back from the 1940s and when people were thinking through machine learning and what does it mean to have machines help us do different tasks. There's very detailed section on safety, privacy, accountability. You have 2 pages here where we provided both news stories that you can use to kind of drive your thinking and questions, because teachers love questions. I think teachers work well with questions. So if you're thinking about whether or not to utilize a tool in your classroom, right, or maybe how to talk to students about it, these are some questions that could help you thinking through how does this tool work? What kind of data does it require? Where does it come from? What are the stated benefits and drawbacks? Who's impacted by this tool? How accurate or effective is it? Which is a big one for to share with students, because sometimes they're using tools that really don't work well. And so this goes through all of those questions as you're thinking through how to frame safety and accountability, and how to frame questions of equity. There's a page that points to more of the AI accountability news stories on the Pulitzer Center site, kind of connecting it with other issue areas. So if you are teaching a class on government, right, and you wanted a story that had the intersection of AI and governance, showing you what you could go to there. Lots of folks are talking about democracy and the election and voting right now. And so we have a story there. AI in the environment is a big conversation that's happening. So this is just a tool to help point you in those directions and help you do some of that learning so that when questions come up in your classroom, you're prepared to answer them. This great page on AI marketing and the different ways that these tools have been sort of championed or rejected over time. And lastly, a page to help you continue your learning with some stories that might be high interest for your students. The one right here, TikTok companies are selling AI therapy. Should you buy it? and using, those kinds of high interest questions to start that conversation. So that is our teacher toolkit. And now I'll pass it over to our team members for our student one.
Hi. So I'm Jane, and Jodi and I worked with a team of middle school and high school teachers to develop this student resource toolkit. And that includes Jerry Johnson, Yolanda Lau, Stephanie King, Comfort Agbula, Casey McCullough, and Kenyon Andrews. And in this toolkit, our group's goal was to create a set of vocabulary activities for the 10 most essential terms that a student should understand in order to engage in the topic of AI. So we started with a giant list of vocabulary words, and we realized this is just too much. I mean, too much for a teacher, too much for a student. So we chose 10 words. So when you go to our student resource, you'll have 10 workbook pages to work from. all with clickable links. And so the example that you see right now is on the vocabulary word algorithm, and there's activities connected to it. So each term includes a link to a Pulitzer Center reporting that we thought a student would find intriguing and relevant. And in this one, you can see the Pulitzer story is about how algorithm is used in the welfare system in India and how it created a massive injustice for the vulnerable populations. And you can click right on that link, and then you can click through that article. You can read other articles written by that journalist and other articles that are in common with that topic. So that was a great resource for the students. And then I guess so the most important thing for us was that we really wanted to connect our students to these stories, which might have been difficult to understand at first, but that's why we're there in the classrooms to help them dissect the stories a little bit. And then Jodi.
Thank you. Hi. So this is another example of one of our vocabulary activities. This one is for the term deep learning. And an article that uses that term we associated with it. Our goal in designing this resource was to provide teachers with a toolkit that would make complex concepts and readings accessible to all students. We were thinking about learners with diverse learning needs and students who are developing English proficiency and wanting everyone to have access to these tools. We identified terms that we thought would have the greatest impact. Like Jane said, it started with this big list, but we thought, what if we had to narrow it down to 10, what's going to have the biggest bang for your buck and really give students support with the basic things they need to know. We wrote student-friendly definitions or associations for each of the terms, and each activity included key terms that we thought would be kind of engaging, prompts and essential questions that would give students options for deepening their thinking about the topic. Next slide, please.
Right. So along with those 10 vocabulary activities, like Jodi was saying, there's activities for each vocabulary word. So we created a menu of options for students to use to extend their learning, to be able to use the vocabulary words, to be able to use it in discussion, and to just be more supportive for each student. So some of them are a little bit more challenging than others, and they're just enrichment activities for kids to choose from. I think it was it was very important for us to build as many choices as possible to make the learning experience accessible for each student because we have a wide range of learners.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about the student work you see on the left. On the top left of the slide, this is an image that two of my 7th grade students co-created. And if you look close, you can see it's kind of like two artists that made it. And they really put a lot of thought into like, how would we depict what we understand machine learning to mean? And that's what this image is here. And then on the bottom left is an example from Jerry, one of our colleagues, that her students made. It's a nice Frere model that they made digitally. And I really like this one because I see how the student made this meaningful to themselves by contrasting like the smartphone with the rotary phone as a way to show the difference in their understanding. I thought that was just very much how a student would depict their visualize their knowledge of this. So excellent job, Jerry, that your student resources looked really great. Next slide, please.
Yes, we'll go. And just before we go to classroom impact, I did want to share the view of our student toolkit here. And there are instructions to begin. So it walks you through. You can start with the vocabulary square exercise, have students make that personal connection, read the story, and use your own classroom reading strategies to help discuss this article. This is meant to be a flexible tool so you and your students could go through, each word one by one. You could jigsaw, you could have students present on different things. And so that's what I love most about the design that our council members came up with. I will also note that I did not before, we have plain text versions of both of these. So if your students don't work well, on the computer, or if there's just a day where some computers aren't charged, and all of the things that happen in the classroom, you can have a paper copy of this vocabulary chart. You can have these questions in a Word document format as well. So that'll be published as well for teachers to access and utilize. And these are the different terms that the team included. All right, and so now each of our presenters will share a little bit about what this looked like in their classroom. I think you'll get to see a bit more student work before we go into our discussion time. Let me go back to our slides and pass it to Jodi, I think.
Yep, that's me. So as I mentioned earlier, I really signed up for this experience because I knew that it was necessary for my own learning. There were just a couple random moments that happened in my life in the weeks and months before I got invited to this, where I was like, whoa, everybody's talking about AI. It's like everywhere all the time. And I don't know what they're talking about. And so I got the email from the Pulitzer Center, and I was like, this is what I need to learn right now. I was starting to understand like this is becoming increasingly more important in our lives. And also it's going to be more important in my students' lives. And so therefore it's crucial that I develop my own background knowledge in order to be able to facilitate my students' learning on a topic that's important to them. So what was cool is that the teacher resource that my colleagues made was a great resource for me in that sense, because it really had this comprehensive overview of the thing, very thoughtful about what kind of things do teachers need to know. And I read it with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm keeping it, it's organized, and it's like organized so that you can easily go back to something that you want to reread. And so I'm going to keep it on hand and go back to it when I need to review things. I learned a lot too from the opportunity to hear from journalists who've done reporting on AI, and thinking about, what I learned and how that impacts my classroom. I think for me, it was very different than what I thought I was going to learn. I thought I was going to learn the technical jargon and be better, better able to understand the science and the technology of AI. And I did learn some things like that, but I think my biggest takeaway was more of a shift in thinking around centering the impact of people when I'm engaging with stories about AI and technology. And I've been thinking a lot about how I translate that kind of personal learning into how it informs my practice as a teacher. I think what that looks like, is being intentional about crafting learning experiences for my students that invite them to develop that same lens. By choosing and crafting the voices and perspectives that get to be represented in our learning in the classroom, and framing the questions that we ask about them. And I don't think that was on my radar at all before I had this experience, but it very much is what I will take away with and stay with me moving forward from having this experience. And one cool moment that I want to kind of share to illustrate that was an experience I had with my students when we got to have our virtual visit with a journalist. We had Joanna Kao came and talked about her reporting on AI and accessibility. She shared with us about AI tools that are marketed specifically to increase accessibility for people who are disabled. But often the tools fail because the AI hasn't been trained using data that represents disabled people. And one of the examples she shared was about voice recognition tools. And she talked about how voice recognition tools often haven't been well trained to distinguish speech of a deaf person or a person who speaks with an accent. And because of this, the tool basically unusable for the people who could most benefit from using the tool. So Joanna was explaining this to my students in a Google Meet, because that's the format that we use at my school. And I was looking around the room, and I noticed that all of my students were turning on their closed caption feature to better understand what Joanna was saying while they were listening to her. And so we kind of talked about that during the meeting. Like we just named that we were actually using the tool that she was explaining. And that was kind of cool. But then when we got off the meet and the students were kind of reflecting afterward, um, they said things like, oh, I've always turned on those closed caption tools, but I never really thought that it was AI before, so they're just kind of having more awareness of what AI is and how much it impacts their life. But two, one of my students said, yeah, I was noticing that the voice recognition was like perfectly capturing what she was saying. And it wasn't making any errors at all. And she said, probably because she speaks with a very unaccented kind of English. And my student said, yeah, I wonder what it would be like in a Google Meet if a person was speaking with an accent. Would it be able to capture their speaking as accurately? And what I thought was cool about that was like, I think maybe that to me kind of illustrates that shift where we're starting to center the impact on people a little bit more. Maybe before we would have just said, oh, that's cool, voice recognition, so cool, so technological. But Joanna's reporting kind of elevated somebody else's experience and helped us to consider the technology from someone else's perspective. So that was very cool. I want to finish by talking a little bit more about accessibility, specifically about how we make complex concepts and readings like the reporting of the Pulitzer Center accessible to our students. Because this is something I think about all the time. I teach in a community where my students and their families speak like more than 60 languages, and all of my students are English learners. Every lesson I plan I'm thinking about appropriate learning experiences for students who speak different levels of English proficiency and read at different levels. And I'm also trying to plan for allowing my students with disabilities and diverse learning needs to learn alongside their grade level peers confidently and successfully. So something that I value and I try really hard to keep at the forefront is that if something is important and necessary for my students to understand or experience, it's my responsibility, it's my job to make that learning accessible to all of them. And even though that can often feel like an impossible task, that's the standard I try to hold myself to, sometimes more successfully than others. So that was really what we had in mind when we designed this student resource. We wanted it to be built with lots of engaging content, a range of extension activities, many opportunities for students to make choices about how and what they learn, because we know that those are the proven components that increase student access to learning. But I have to be transparent too and tell you that some of my students had a great experience and were really excited and challenged by the tool, the student tool, and some of my students did struggle with it. The number one thing I saw them struggling with was it really had to do with how interesting the Pulitzer Center articles were, because the activity was designed to just get them started with the basic vocabulary. And I wanted them to just start. I felt like if you have the foundation of these 10 words, then later when we go in and really closely read a Pulitzer Center article, those essential vocabulary will support you. But my students were so interested in the articles that they really just wanted to read them right then and there. And then they were getting really frustrated because they didn't understand. Even some of my best readers were, I love that they wanted to read them so badly, but the failure in the way I planned the lesson was that they got really frustrated. So I've thought a lot about how I will improve this when I teach it again. One idea I have is maybe with each link, I could give a summary of the key points in student-friendly language, really using that term in context, so that students can deepen their understanding of the term, still get excited about the Pulitzer Center reporting, see the pictures and the title, but not getting overwhelmed with the complexity of the text. And we can always come back to it later when we read it more deeply. So I just share this to emphasize the point that making learning accessible is always on my radar, and I think it's the work of a lifetime for every teacher, and I don't think we ever master it. I'm proud of the resource we designed, and I know I'll continue to use it. I just lost one of my One of my AirPods just fell out, but I think you can still hear me, so that's all that really matters. I want to end by just saying if anybody uses our tool and wants to talk about it, I'd love to hear from you about how you used it, what you found good or bad. And if you have any thoughts about how to make it work better with your students, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jodi. Um, Kerri.
I don't know how I'm going to follow that, but I'm going to try my very best. So I wanted to give an overview of what my experience was both in the council, how I came to this place, what the work looked like, working with the tools. And so I wanted to start at the beginning. So I am a civics and social studies teacher, so I'm always considering the ways in which our rights exist in our world and what potential challenges we may face. A little backstory on me. Last year, I had participated as a Pulitzer Fellow, and I read the article tracked from peering into the black box, and I was absolutely fascinated because for the first time, I saw AI as something that was, well, I wouldn't call it sinister. I wouldn't call it nefarious. There were question marks. It wasn't just, oh, how can ChatGPT help me to write this essay? It really became a question of who's watching what I'm writing and what's happening here. So I wanted to introduce this to my students and I wanted to see what their thinking was. I also wanted to know what their baseline is. Do they have any sense of what we mean by journalism, knowing that working with Pulitzer, they're a journalistic entity. They are reporting stories that other agencies may not be reporting. So what you're seeing on the screen is actually one of my students' responses to a couple of baseline questions. Because if we're going to talk about reporting, we need to know what reporting is. And so my first questions were, what even is journalism? What does a journalist do? And it was interesting to see, this was, I would say, one of my better responses because to many students, they simply didn't know. And so part of our journey involved, well, I'm going to introduce you to what a journalist does. And we talked about the work of a journalist and how they're responsible for reporting, but it's not always reporting the things that just because people want to hear them. It's also about reporting the stories that we need to hear, even if other people aren't speaking on them. It was also interesting as we looked at how do you get your news. I was surprised. I was convinced that they were all going to tell me that they get their news from social media. And while many of them did, that wasn't always the case. While they don't get their news from the television, a lot of them will get it from what they call the internet, which I think is just how they're calling social media, but it's all connected in a digital sense. Next slide. So this led us to a great conversation where we actually defined what even is artificial intelligence. We looked at, okay, we're using the words, what do we mean by them? And so there was exposure to the ways that AI is being used, what AI is, and how this is the use of machines to take over some of the work for humans. And I think that in itself was eye-opening because the first word that came up was, oh, it's robots. Okay, great, robots. Robots are going to take over the world. And I said, well, I don't think robots are taking over, and they're certainly not taking over this classroom right now, although that may have been a hope at one point. But it was interesting to hear what their perception was. It was also interesting to hear students say, I've never even heard this term before, with the most genuine, authentic puzzlement of, what do you even mean? And so knowing that we had that very wide range of knowledge and first-time exposure really did help to bring about our lesson. So we spent some time talking about what do we mean by AI, and that led us to, on our journey, investigating some of the journalism that the Pollock Center has done. So we looked at an article, tracked how colleges use AI to monitor student protests. And this was something that was eye-opening, to say the least, for our students, because I don't think they had ever considered the way in which AI was being used, and seeing that reporting really was, and you'll notice we really spent a lot of time talking about, okay, so someone's looking at what you're writing. What does that mean for your First Amendment rights? So this was something that I had started to discuss last year with a class when I was working as a Pulitzer Fellow, and I carried it over into this year because it really is a topic that it's not in your standards yet. It doesn't exist in any documentation, but we do need to consider, okay, well, if AI is here, where does our free speech, where does it live? And so this was highlighted in the article, and our students took some time to look through the article. They read through it. And then we had a chance to actually talk with one of the journalists who contributed to the article tract. And this was, he's coming up next. This was Ari. And so Ari came into the classroom in a virtual meeting. And those are my students, and they are participating in a virtual meeting. They had some great questions. They were listening to the development of this story. They were listening to how it was that Ari brought awareness to the way in which AI was being used. And it was funny to hear them ask some of the questions where they really wanted to know, okay, so what does a reporter even do? And for our middle school students, that was a chance to actually get an opportunity to speak to someone who works in that professional field that maybe they hadn't worked in before. For my end, it was helpful that I was able to answer some of the questions they had. I had my toolkit. I knew what was in there. And so when students were saying, oh, okay, I know what AI is. AI, that's the stuff that, yep, it's going to write my essay. That wasn't the case. I was able to say, well, there's more to it than just that. And had you ever considered that AI has been used to fill orders for people? AI has been used to, AI is your chatbot, and AI as your chatbot has lived for a long time. So looking at that toolkit, I had the tools at my fingertips where if students were coming to me, they didn't need to go to Google, they didn't need to go searching the internet. I was able to answer a lot of those questions for you. And I would just say one of my big takeaways would be that students really started to question, okay, what's happening? And that's thanks to the work that the Pulitzer Center did. If you go to the next slide, I think there's some quotes from a few of our students at the very end. And the big thing was students were reflecting, I didn't even know that. But probably the one that got me the most was, why isn't anyone else talking about this? Why isn't anyone else bringing this up? Why isn't anyone else making that connection? Why isn't anyone else reporting on this? And I absolutely had a student who said, I need to think twice before I put something in print. I need to think twice before I hit send on that email because I don't really know. Are my emails going to be tracked? Is my online presence going to be tracked? What am I putting out there? And how can I make sure that I'm being a safe digital citizen? And that's all led to some additional conversations that we're having. And so this was just a little glimpse into the journey that I took with my students. And it was just incredible to see how teachers now have this tool, how they have this opportunity to anchor their thinking and be able to be responsive to their student needs. That is all I have for that.
I think this is
I am so
Linda.
sorry. I'm so sorry I was muted. Okay, so at our school in Haven Middle School in Evanston, I wanted to just preface this by saying there were 2 weeks, solid weeks of map testing that preceded the journalist visit, virtual visit. So as much as I wanted to provide a lot of prep, I wasn't really given the opportunity. It was more of afterwards. Anyway, so but we did do I think I put the slides in the wrong order. I should have probably put the initial student reflections. No. the student reflections probably came first, right? So I had them fill out a form, and with the questions that were provided by the Pulitzer Center. And three of them really stood out to me. One was, how do you think AI might affect your future career or daily life? And almost the consensus among the 20 students in our LLA class was, it'll take over the jobs. It seems very simplistic, but this literally was the answer among 20 students. The other one was, how might the widespread use of these technologies change society in the next 10 years? Again, a similar type of consistent theme was, well, society will be more dependent on AI and we'll have less skills since AI will do it for us. And then the third question was, what responsibilities do you think individuals, companies, and governments have in ensuring AI is used ethically? And in a lot of our discussions, they said, we need to shut down the AI sites that spread disinformation, which I was actually very, very impressed by, because a lot of students at the middle school age don't even make a distinction between what is legitimate news, what is propaganda, what is just disinformation. And so I was actually impressed by that, even though it was rather simplistic in the way they expressed it. The next slide was the actual photograph of the student resource impact, where the students at our school in our classroom, they were very engaged during the virtual visit by the freelance Greek journalist Lydia Emenal. Excuse me, Emenal. You're gonna help me here. I said her name correctly when we introduced her, Emma Naladu. She was the 2022 Pulitzer Center AI Accountability Fellow. And her presentation was amazing. And the students went from, there's an excerpt from before the journalist visit survey. It was actually a Google form, but because our district is so strict about protecting the privacy of students, I had to like literally convert it to a paper format and adapt it, but essentially it captured the same information. So in the pre-visit survey form, one of the 8th grade students wrote in his terrible handwriting, not even, it's printing because they don't teach cursive anymore in our school district, which is driving me crazy. But he wrote, I don't watch the news. And then his answers reflected total disengagement with what's happening in the news. And this is an 8th grader ready to enter, high school in next year. So, and I attribute that to, they don't prioritize journalism or at our school. I was originally assigned to be the student newspaper advisor because of my journalism background. But our principal has decided that we're going to go in a different direction because he feels that there's no interest in journalism. And I'm thinking, well, it's totally contradictory to this whole project. But anyway, so after the visit, in stark contrast, after the Pulitzer Center journalist's Zoom presentation, the same student's response reflected it had made an impact on him since he thought it was, quote, cool, and that underreported stories are worth noting since, quote, they are important. So to me, that was a win-win. It was a huge, major win for us. because you're talking about eighth graders who spend so much time on their iPads, gaming, etc., in their off times. And sports is I'm the debate coach, and we do have 28 people this year on our debate team, but um, most of the 780 students are oriented towards sports. But anyway, so I chose this particular student because, as I said, he was totally not interested at all in the visit. And then once he was actually saw her speak, he just did a 180 about face, and I was very pleased.
Thanks, Linda. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jane Lawrence, and I'm a visual arts teacher in New York. Currently, it's my 19th year teaching visual arts. And like Jodi, I taught at a school where all of my students were learning English. They were all recent immigrants and refugees. So I did a lot of work with visual arts and literacy. And it also kind of pushed me towards making art projects that dealt with design thinking and sort of how artists become the creators and makers. And so I joined this AI accountability group because I have spent so much time with people in my life talking about AI, and I always feel like I'm the one that knows the least about AI. And so I really joined this group to learn because I knew it was something that I needed to teach because it is everywhere, especially like now that I teach graphic design. And, Adobe has AI generated image, you can AI generate anything on Adobe right now. So it's a very hot topic amongst art teachers, what is okay in the art room. So I thought it was a good opportunity. So that's why I joined this group, and I'm glad they took me in. Uh, so the students that I worked with were a mix. So I didn't work with a class. I worked with students after school, which actually I think is great because these are the kids who really wanted to be there, or maybe they didn't, but they were curious. And so my students were a mix of some of my students, some art students, some of their friends. And then it was students that were in my makers club and my robotics club. And I'm the robotics advisor, even though I don't know anything about building robots, but I think that says a lot about me, which is um I am proud to admit that I can learn with my students. They needed an advisor. I said, I don't know robots, but let's learn together. And that's all they needed. And so we were going to learn about AI together. And this is a picture of us talking to Hilke Schellmann, and she is fantastic. I think she inspired a bunch of high school students to become journalists. So I love the website, Pulitzer's website, because you can click on journalists and then you can see all their projects and all the articles they've written and all the research that they've done with other journalists. Next slide, please. So before we began using the Pulitzer Center resources and the resources that my group created, I asked my students a couple questions, which is sort of like what Kerri did, which is like, what is AI? What are the positive aspects? What are the problems that arise from AI? And how can we as artists design better ways to use AI? And I like to use Padlet a lot when I ask lots of questions because then you know, kids can write their answers and read each other's answers. It's a great way to kind of project it on your board. And that, I'm not going to read these answers. It's really text heavy, but I think we're sharing the slides with you so you can read them. But a lot of their answers you can see is that when I assess their answers, they talk about generative AI. So I think what I've realize is that, a lot of teens, when they think of AI, they think of, what can it generate? My essay, my drawing, my idea, titles, so I don't know if that was new to me, but it definitely it definitely, hammered it in, the idea that, okay, kids think AI is generative. So then my next slide, that's when I started to engage the students with the toolkit that Pulitzer Center will publish next week. And that's when their questions started to become way more relevant about their lives. So in one of the toolkits, we started to read about accessibility in AI by an article by Joanna Kao, and she actually visited our group and talked to us. So it was really awesome to meet her virtually. And so my students got to read her article, and I got to tell her the story about how we met and what she talked about and her experiment she did with us. And my students realized that AI is not just generative, right? So I think what happened is that they realized that this goes beyond this goes beyond their assignments, what they can use to make their lives go quickly. This is affecting their family. This is affecting their future. This is affecting like entry-level jobs, you know. Um, and it does affect certain groups of socioeconomic groups and students. My students, if they want to get an entry-level job, it might affect them because a lot of these companies are using AI to hire. And so I think I think after talking to Hilke and reading these articles, I don't know if I put fear in them. That's not what I wanted to do, but I wanted to spark conversation. And I think that happened because on the Padlet, we talked about what did you discover? And what do you want to what do you want to do about it? And so our next slide, I um I just wanted to share a compare like a I would just wanted to share here one sorry I'm sorry Casey McCullough, he's a computer science teacher in California. He was also a council member in our group, and he shared an article with his students, and his students responded in paragraph form. And I have a little pull quote there, and it says, and a con to AI was how it was used later on by schools to target someone for speaking freely, putting on a bad image on that person. And that is a response from a student. And my student, after speaking with Hilke, speaking with Hilke, he asked her, can AI affect college admission? And so, this directly correlates to like what they're going to do, not in the far future, in the near future. Like high school is only 4 years, you know. You tell kids in freshman year, oh, well, college is 4 years away. You have a lot of time to prepare. But like technology in 4 years, like so much happens in 4 years. So I think it was just eye-opening for them. I'm not going to read through these slides, but just, these questions that my students asked the journalists were really, I felt great empathy for my kids because they were starting to realize that they needed to understand it more. And they were almost like, well, we're staying after school and you're showing this to us, but like, we would never have seen this before. And like, we would never have met this journalist before. And I'm like, yeah, but like the resource is out there. And so I think as an art teacher, my job is always to encourage my students to create and to make and to respond and to also speak their mind through their artwork. And that also means that's what designers do, right? And that's what graphic designers do. That's what you do on a commercial level as well. So in an art teacher lens, I asked them, well, what can you do knowing this information? And so in the next slide, we created some next steps. So our next steps is we wanted to design something to do at our school. I mean, it's only October, right? This was September when I did this. So we designed some next steps, like what can we do for our high school to help kind of share what we know about AI, right? None of us are like, none of us are like, we don't know that much about AI, but we now know it's beyond generative, right? And so we thought, well, we have a high school newspaper. So one student suggested, well, why don't we have a tech column in the high school newspaper? And I said, why don't you write it? And she said, no, I don't like to write. So I said, well, why don't you find someone who likes to write and just tell them the stories and point them the way? We also have once a month, we have a like a school uh, video broadcast that all the homeroom teachers play. It's great. It's like sports highlights, upcoming events highlights, they interview teachers. It's fun. And so a student said, why can't we have a tech flash where we just you know, share a crazy story about AI? And it doesn't have to be something doom and gloom. It could be something fun and wild. And we could put a QR code where they can just take their phones and snap a pic, grab an article to read later. I said, that's a good idea. Tell the video teacher or create a separate newsletter, which I said I think is a little too much work, or create a cafeteria bulletin board, which is easy. Or the biggest idea, which I thought was like, wow, that's lofty, was like they were like, why can't we hold info sessions at our local library so we can talk to even the elderly community and call it the tales of the AI? Because we live in Sleepy Hollow, which is a very spooky town. And so they thought maybe we can tell spooky stories about AI. And I was like, that's a really great idea. Go do it. So that was really what I've done so far with our resources. And it was a lot of fun. And um, I know a little bit more about AI. I still know less than most of my friends and family, but I do know that it is important to teach. And yeah, I'm going to use these resources. And along with Jodi, I think the resources were a little difficult, so I'm gonna change them up a little bit, maybe add more photos. That's what I would do. But that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. It was just really great. All your questions or all your presentations and takeaways. I'm going to take these slides off the screen now, so that we can move into our moderated discussion. I think we've got some questions here in the Q&A. I also had a few questions that I prepared beforehand, so we'll start with a couple of those and then move right into the audience Q&A. And thank you so much for everyone who's been commenting and engaging so far. And so to start, I guess, one of the questions that came in, I don't think everyone saw it because it came into hosts and panelists, but was this question about, if students use AI for a college admission, essay or something, will that affect their entry, right? And these are kinds of questions that universities are asking right now. We know that because our organization also works with university educators. They're doing same learning around this. The survey data that we reviewed together as a council had a few professors who filled it out, and they were asking these questions of, what is my responsibility here? What do I need to teach? What should my policies be? And so one of the great things I think about starting these conversations with your students is that not all the policies are in place yet. Not everything is decided yet, right? They actually have an ability to be sort of shapers here in a way that they might not realize. And so our survey data for our panel here, showed us that there's a growing interest from teachers in engaging their students around this, both K-12 and university level, but many feel unequipped for those conversations. I'm curious if any of you want to speak to how starting with the basics, as these tools do, can be a useful strategy for bridging that gap and for feeling more equipped to be able to even begin conversation.
I can go first. I You know, I shared about this. I heard Jane say this too. A lot of us, we know that like starting the basics for us means building our own background knowledge, you know, because we really can't do that. We can't even know what the basics are for our students or how to get them there if we don't have it. So my thoughts about that are, you know, like with the tools that we're presenting here today, I think people who want to do that could do teacher study groups. Either like a teacher study group to go over the teacher resource together or try out the student resource, or just to read Pulitzer Center reporting about AI topics, you know, yeah, because I did appreciate the chance to do this with other teachers. And I think that, you know, a lot of times we try to figure things out on our own, but it's always rich to do things with others. Yeah.
I would just add on, I think what our toolkit and what our resources will do is they'll give you a starting place. They're not a finishing place. They're not the be all, they're not the end all, but they're the start of what can be your learning journey. And I agree, work with your colleagues. If you can get together, maybe members of your team, maybe you can gather colleagues during lunch, or if you have PD time that's set aside, and really look at what is it that the resource can provide to teachers. And also, okay, now that you've got this starting place, where do you want to take this next? How do you want to employ this in your classroom? How do you want to use this with students? What can that look like? It's great when you can cross collaborate too. Well, I didn't on this opportunity. I have worked with our ELA teachers. How are we using this in not just social studies, but how are we using it in ELA? How are we using it in technology? Where are the places where this is a conversation that can live in more than just one classroom? So absolutely gather up those teacher friends, invite them to Tales of the AI. I hear that's going to be really great. And I think that is phenomenal. And get your kids excited. Really, if the kids are excited, the teachers will be excited because they're going to want to have those conversations.
I love that. And yeah, going sort of to the point of Tales of the AI and kind of the other end of the spectrum, I'm curious about, you know, following this counsel, you know, following this work with your students, what is your assessment of the stakes here if teachers and administrators are not engaging critically with these ideas, are not asking these questions, or trying to learn more about AI themselves? Like, what do you find most urgent after your study of AI accountability?
Jodi and I had a conversation about this actually. The other day, I was talking to my friend about this. I actually ran that question by my friend, and like nicely, to say it nicely, I think we would be doing a great disservice to not talk about AI with our students. And I don't think it really matters which discipline you teach in, because AI is in every discipline, right? We're using technology in every discipline. Um, it's it is clearly amazing. It's clearly, there's so many great things about it, and it's clearly really dangerous too. If for teenagers at least, like my students, and I've worked with teenagers for like almost 2 decades. It's like it's a hard thing to navigate, and if you're not there to help them navigate it, then they're never gonna have good footing on it. So I think it's really important.
I know from having participated in this teacher council, I definitely want to bring a lot of these resources and share it within our school district. And I joined our just the other day. We're forming a committee to decide policies, district use of AI. And I was really surprised because there hasn't been a lot, there's a real lack of interest on the part of teachers. And uh, I think in their minds, oh, that's the tech department's responsibility, because they're the ones buying, making the decisions of what kind of software we have, you know, what kind of educational programming we're doing. And it really concerns me because I think there's a real ethical component too that we have to teach not only our students, but our fellow colleagues, teaching colleagues about AI and its applications.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Anyone else want to comment on that one before we?
I would just remind people AI isn't going anywhere. It's been here for a long time. It's not going to disappear. So it's for those who might be hesitant, we want to remember that this is not a disappearing technology. It's something that we want to make sure that we're teaching our students to use safely and teaching our colleagues to use safely. And that's the other piece is I love the idea of having that committee, of having some shared norms that are established, not just within a classroom, but across a school, across a district, so that you have those spaces where people can say, this is my comfort level. Great, well, let's talk about how you can have some tools in your toolkit to be able to support your students when you're feeling that way.
Yeah, actually today I had a department meeting and we were asked to sort of make a list on what's acceptable use of AI in the art classroom and what's not, and also just like what's a great way to approach AI when teaching it. And we were talking about generative AI mostly, but I was thinking and I shared like I think maybe working backwards is really good when you like take an interesting article or top like an interesting outcome and then you you go back and like is it science based, is it history based, and then you bring it into your classroom that way. That's how you can buy in with your faculty members, your colleagues. Because I feel like if you ask your colleagues to teach something, you're putting something else on their plate. But if you're giving your colleagues a resource or something interesting to think about, you're kind of giving them something to use instead.
Love that. And then we have a really sort of insightful question here from Kelly about the fact that we talk about safe use and we talk about these different issues. One of the things that we talk about on the teacher graphic is digital safety and digital citizenship. Kelly brings up the point that while digital citizenship regarding data input is important, data extraction practices, of some tech are far beyond individual locus of control. So there's your students can be thinking about what they post online and different things, but there's some data that they'll never control where it goes. And so the question is, how does the toolkit frame that tension, if at all? And I guess I'll add to that to say, um, how are you all thinking about, those sorts of things of this is where we can um, teach or show students or maybe our coworkers about safety and practice, and then there are also these things that are by design, by the way the tech is designed, kind of beyond control.
I have to say that our school district does, they have the librarians conduct, because the librarians have access to every single student. They always present once a year a digital citizenship overview. It's very rudimentary, but it at least engages the students to reflect on how to protect themselves from possible misuses of their information that they're putting forth all the time. A lot of students don't have any, I can't say impulse control, but they just think that they can share out anything, and it later comes to haunt them. I read somewhere that university admissions officers comb through your digital profiles, prospective student applicants, digital profiles on every single social media site. So if there's a picture of, some student, drinking beer at a party, that looks, doesn't help their case. But so anyway, the digital citizenship aspect, that is very, very, it is a priority within our district, and I'm glad about that.
I'll add on to that just a little bit. Thanks, Linda. I taught civics for a long time. I heard Kerri say that she teaches civics too, and like this makes me think that we have to kind of modernize the way we talk about students taking action and what citizenship, means for the times and for the issues that they're going to face in their lives. Civics is about teaching them about their responsibilities, but also the ways that they can use their voices to take action. And these are the issues that our students are going to have to advocate for themselves in their lifetime. So it makes me, I don't teach it anymore, but if I were, I would really be, I would be incorporating this more, because they are powerful consumers actually, and have, like even using TikTok, they're determining who's getting ad revenue and stuff like that. So they can demand that people, give them privacy and don't use their data, if they organize and learn to take action. So that's kind of it. My brain goes to like a civics organizing mindset with this.
So collective action, student agency, that direction.
I love that. And I think that is kind of core to what the AI Accountability Network reporting is trying to do, to say, even if there, is data that's been collected that you couldn't control, or there's these different things that are happening, better understanding the questions to ask, right? Better understanding what is happening around you is a true first step to making your own meaning about those impacts and trying to decide what you want to do next. And before we close, I want to give each of you another chance to just, if you have any last word advice for teachers who are hoping to utilize journalism as a tool for understanding AI. What's most important to consider? You shared a lot of great feedback already, but is there anything else you want to add on, especially for teachers who may not be teaching journalism, right? Which again, you all have varied studies, and folks in our council taught all subjects too. So I
think the fact that they're even on this webinar is a positive sign that they're interested in the impact of journalism, in the underreported stories, in other words, and how there needs to be that constant vigilance on teachers' parts, and students, the public as a whole. And so subscribe to the Pulitzer Center's newsletter.
I'm gonna share a couple links because oh, I think I am. Well, here. I had a couple things that came to mind when DJ kind of previewed this question with us. And one of the things we learned in the council that really stuck with me is that they introduced us to the AP guidance for reporting on the topic of AI. And I love the questions that they frame, like if we're learning about AI, we should be asking how the systems work, where they're deployed, how well they perform, whether they're regulated, who benefits and makes money. And I think like those same questions are really good ones for students to use when they're engaging with reporting about AI. And the other thing I dropped in is a few years ago, I was in the 1619 education network. And a tool that we made then to work with, we used a different Pulitzer reporting piece with my student, and I use it every year. The document that I shared has like, I just think it's a really good note taker to use anytime you're looking at investigative research, because it invites students to think about like the sourcing, like what sources are being cited here. Is this person backing up what they're saying with evidence? What claims are they making? And what is their role? So like if let's say you're reading an article and the CEO of the company that sells the AI is the person being quoted all the time, then you're going to notice and you're going to think more critically about what that person is saying. So these are just some tools that I offer for anybody who wants to try to use them, because I think they would work with any reporting really.
Um, you know, I'm an art teacher, so I think like I think my parting words is that like always connect with other teachers. I mean, I also did the teaching fellows a couple years ago, and I met so many teachers and that I never thought I'd ever talk to. And we connected in creating curriculum, and even in this program too. Like I never thought that I would make curriculum with a middle school teacher, and we did, and it's great because we have such great perspectives of our country right now, right? We are like we're all over the states, and we have such a great perspective of the kids. So keep connecting. And then also, in terms of I just encourage you guys to, if you're educators, to have your students imagine, just like really imagine what it looks like, what like this program looks like, how it really affects people, what it visually looks like, because sometimes that really helps my kids when they imagine the community it affects.
All right. All I'm going to say is when it comes to AI and it comes to working with your colleagues, let this be a door, not a window. Let this be an opportunity for you to come through and to connect with your colleagues. There's so many opportunities where science will intersect with social studies and ELA. We'll find those math people as we're looking at the algorithms and the data and the numbers. It doesn't have to be, oh, I'm going to look at it from what someone else is doing. There's ways to collaborate. There's ways to connect with your peers, and it will ease some of the fear I think that a lot of teachers do have about the unknown with, I don't even know where to begin. And so if they have that level of comfort that someone's going to walk with them, I think that's going to be really helpful. And there's so many stories that we can share, and we just need to get the word out so that people can see us. So I'm going to echo Linda, go to the Pulitzer and sign up because it's worth it. And there's so much for you to experience, more than you can possibly realize. And they have amazing curriculum units. So it's not just articles, there's so much that's available for your use. And I hear it may be free.
And spread the word. Share with, exponentially. If you tell 10 people and they tell 10 people, et cetera, et cetera. Because the resources are incredible. I mean, just, and as you say, that, they're freely accessible.
Well, I appreciate each of you so much for your amazing presentations and for doing like part of my job for me. Here in our closing, I do want to encourage folks once more to get involved, however is most exciting for you. So as folks have shared, we have free education resources on our website. The toolkits that you saw presented today will be published early next week. The best way to make sure you do not miss them is by signing up for our education newsletter, so that you will be the first to know when it is published. Thank you for dropping that subscription there in the chat. You will also find information about participating in the upcoming journalist visits. So you heard our panelists here talk about journalists coming into their classrooms. Later this month, we will have what we call featured journalist visits, which is like multiple schools and classrooms engaging with a journalist at the same time, which could also be a very cool experience for your students to see that not only are we doing this learning here in my class, but students across the country, right, are engaging with this and engaging with these questions. So there's the featured journalist visits, but you can also schedule an AI journalist to visit your own classroom. And as folks have stated here, if you do utilize these resources once they are published, once we send them out, please send us your feedback. You send us, notes from the lesson or student reactions or whatever it is, because we're going to continue to try to resource and engage the audience with this like critical reporting. All of this started with the teacher survey, and so the teacher feedback that you all have is absolutely critical. Yeah, and so thank you so much for being here. Let the panelists come up to thank you once more and share anything else you want in the chat before we say goodbye. Thank you so much, Kelly, and everyone else who's been engaging with us throughout. Thank you, Jerry. Oh, let me stop the share. All right, that's it.
Should we stay on for a second or leave?
I'm trying to.